what do you call Derek? Document files?
Document lab. Document lab would be the best.
And we're back here on the Michigan Crusaders. I am Mike Kilbreth, and sitting down with me in this segment to break down how we got the DNA on the... And we're back here on the Michigan Crusaders. I am Mike Kilbreth, and in this segment, we're going to break down how the cigarettes were collected for the DNA of one of the suspects in one of the most famous cases ever. In joining us, Derek Brumwicker. Joining us, Derek Brumrick, one of the Team GBI. Jeez. Joining us, Derek Brumrick, one of the Team JBI members. He is the document lab supervisor for the team, and we're going to break down how he was able to collect the DNA evidence, the cigarette butts, that led to a pretty significant finding in one of the most significant cases in American history. And we're back here on the Michigan Crusaders. I am Mike Kilbreth, and in this closing segment, we're going to go back to Roscoe Clark, our forensic scientist, to tell us about some of the investigations and what went into developing the list of suspects in one of the most famous American murder mysteries ever in this country. Did I do one the first time? I did already. We're going to take a break here on the Michigan Crusaders. We'll be back with more after this break for some commercial messages. I'll tell you, Derek, fascinating stuff. Great work out in Colorado, getting the evidence that's probably going to put away the culprits at long last on one of the most famous murder cases in American history. We'll be back with more here on the Michigan Crusaders. We're going to have a closing segment and sit down again with Roscoe Clark of the Team JBI, the investigator that has spent 12 years of his life getting us to this point today. Roscoe, fascinating stuff. I'll tell you what, this should be the break in the case that's needed to solve one of the most famous murder mysteries in American history. I'll tell you what, Boulder, Colorado, stuff's on its way to you. Do your job and bring justice to this family. I'm Mike Kilbreth. Thanks for tuning in today to the Michigan Crusaders. You can join us online for the conversation at myamadvantage.com. Derek, you're the guy who collected the cigarette butts. Tell us how you got the evidence. What did you do? Did you follow the guy around? How did you get this evidence?
Well, I went to his street and stayed there and watched. And the person of interest, the subject, put his trash cans out for collection the following day. And so I decided to come back later at around 2 a.m. and I got the trash out of his cans. And that's how and from that I took it to my hotel room and started sorting it. And that's how I got what I needed to get us to this point.
Now, when you talk to the undersheriff, when we presented the evidence, he questioned a lot about chain of custody and things like that. This evidence probably isn't going to be able to be used by the police, but the hope is that you can use it to get a warrant to go get DNA from this gentleman. But tell us about some of the steps you took to make sure you safeguarded this evidence that it was really his cigarette butts. At least we think it was his cigarette butts because he's the guy who lived in the house, correct?
Correct. Every time I saw him exit his home, he was smoking. So I figured we would have a collection with a lot of cigarette butts in it. So as per standard procedure, I wore a mask, put on gloves, and I collected the bags. Once I took them back to where I needed to sort them, I opened it up, and I had per standard procedure, I had the mask on, I had the gloves, tweezers, and I sorted out the many cigarette butts that were in the trash. We got over 50 butts, so we're not short on potential butts to test.
Derek, how did you get involved with this case with Roscoe Clark and the John Bonet investigation team?
Well, about 2.5 years ago, I stumbled across Roscoe Clark's the page that he runs online, and thought it was very interesting. And so I actually started out just doing some very basic research on some of the stuff that he was posting, and found it very intriguing. And one thing led to another. I found one thing that he was looking for, and then I kept finding more and more things. And it got to this point because I never ran into a dead end. It just kept going and going and going. And if I'd have run into a dead end, I don't know if I would have continued, but I never ran into a dead end. So it started about 2.5 years ago. It got to this point.
Now, Derek, you've taken care of the documents, as Roscoe Clark refers to it, his document lab. Tell us about how you, because your involvement here, you're going to be famous for picking up the cigarette butts that led to the suspect, because the DNA certainly tells a story that you can't escape from. But the problem I see is now we have to get the Boulder police to do this. But in developing motive, tell us about some of your work in going through the documents and building a case on the list of suspects that was narrowed down on. How did you get to this point? The documents told a story about financial problems. As Roscoe said in the last segment, John Douglas, the famous profiler, said this was a crime that probably had to do with financial stuff. That was the lead that you guys went from, the premise of somebody had financial problems. Tell us about some of the work you had on these documents of getting to the point of helping develop who these suspects really were.
Well, one thing that helped me was we have digital tools that I wouldn't have had if I worked on this 20 years ago, and that I could request documents online over the internet. In the past, if I'd have done this years ago, I'd have had to fill out forms. It would have taken a very long time. But now, because all the sources of information where I needed to get this information are online, I can do it. I can order things from my home without having to dig very deep, without having to go across the country. I could just order. Digital technology allows me to let's try that again.
You're doing fantastic.
Today's modern digital technology allowed me to do a lot of.
9/11.
What the hell was that?
Keep going.
Oh. Okay, hold on. Oh, that.
Today's digital
Oh yeah.
technology.
Today's digital technology allowed me to do a lot of the work from the documents lab. I didn't have to travel to get these documents. Various websites where I could order these documents, and that's how I was able to find the paper trail for this case.
Tell us about the paper trail.
Well, we can say for certain that persons of interest were in very steep financial trouble. Very steep financial trouble.
How much?
What's that?
The total.
200,000.
I would estimate
Wait a minute. Start over with they're in deep financial trouble.
the persons of interest, most of them were in very deep financial trouble at the time of the murder, and we were able to track down court documents proving this. I lost my train of thought.
Start it all over from
The amount?
Yeah.
What's the question?
The
the
amount?
200,000.
Oh yeah,
The suspects of interest. Go back to that.
the suspects, the persons of interest, were in very deep financial trouble at the time of the crime. I would estimate at a minimum the particular house location where they operated from had the combined total of at the minimum $200,000 in debt, and that's just a minimum. the number is probably much higher. And so the persons of interest were in very serious financial trouble. Lawsuits, bank garnishments, foreclosures, you name it, just about everything was hitting them. And it was hitting them all at the exact same time, all in December of 1996. All these judgments were hitting, and probably contributed to the motive for this crime.
Anything else you can think of, Roscoe?
Let me pull the board, see the record on? The light came on, see it record?
Roscoe Clark of Flint Township. We've had you on my radio show in Metro Flint, the Morning Gazette radio show, a number of times over the years before you were featured on the cover of the National Enquirer. But take us through the DNA process. We have the DNA markers. Now, the sheriff, Chris Swanson in Genesee County, his Under-Sheriff Mike Angus that we just met with, they said, you know, there are guys on death row with 5 or 6 markers. There are 14 markers, and you hit 13 of them with these suspects. Take us through what all this means, all this complicated DNA on the results that have just been submitted to the FBI. Tell us about the DNA.
Sure. What we wanted to do is we sent a team member out to Colorado to DNA clear a person of interest. And so our goal to go out there was not to identify a person of interest, is to clear them. That's how we go at it. If we can't clear them through a DNA collection and collecting an item of DNA to be tested, then we'll continue to the next step. So we went out, we had a team member collect the cigarettes, we sent it to a certified lab, the results came back, and we can't exclude them from being in the mixture from the original crime scene.
Now, when you say mixture, explain to us the mixture. There were 3 suspects, and by the way, we have to go back in history here. The state attorney actually asked for a grand jury to be convened, and they came back, we found out years later, to indict the parents in this case, even though they knew that the DNA had other people's sample in there. There were 3 individuals. It's a mixture of DNA. Talk to us about that.
Well, they know back then in 1996 DNA was very new and was not very well understood. Today DNA testing is very advanced. Just the smallest, tiniest amount can be fully analyzed. Every person has their own DNA profile, so it's just as good or better than a fingerprint. So we're using DNA as well as the public has access it to familiar DNA, like Ancestors and some of those .com companies. We can track our background. So DNA is another tool which has to be included with a lot more evidence to actually convict someone. You'd never convict someone on a DNA, we'll call match or something that's close, but it's part of a tool we can use forensically to help keep us on track.
Roscoe, now, at some point during the 12 years that you've been working in your spare time on this case, you decided to get certified. Tell us about your certifications.
Well, as an independent researcher, I needed to know, and our team needed to know, different things we're researching about how this case, the John Benet Ramsey case, was handled. There's a lot of public information out there which allows us to do more testing. So I needed to know more about forensics. So several years ago, I became certified in a lot of different areas through the United States Department of Justice, Continuous Education, Searchy Training, and several other organizations that train law enforcement, crime labs. And so I take advantage of doing those hours, hundreds of hours, doing the exams and tests, and purchasing the equipment. So not only do I have an understanding, I have a full, we'll call it a John Benet cold case lab, fully capable of doing very advanced work.
Tell us about some of the work you did.